My sister-in-law slapped me in front of everyone at the party for accidentally pushing her, but my husband chose her side. Now he's stunned over the divorce. I think the thing that hurt me the most was how she tried to humiliate me, particularly with her comments about my salary. For some background, my sister-in-law, Brittany, married a wealthy man, Brad, not long after college. He's much older than her, 13 years older, and 9 years older than Kyle and me. Brad is a successful professional from a rich family, which put Brittany in a very comfortable financial position. Since their marriage, she's lived a life of luxury and has come to think of the rest of us as poor. The irony is that she calls herself a traditional wife. Yes, you read that right. She identifies as a traditional wife. Unlike us, she spends most of her time posting TikToks about how her life's purpose is to serve her husband and prepare to be the best mother for their future kids. For her, being a traditional wife is a badge of honor, but she views the world and everyone in it through a lens of privilege and arrogance. The funniest part is that they have so much money, she doesn't even need to do anything for her husband. His employees handle it all. It's not like she's waiting for him with dinner after a long day at work. Brittany's husband, Brad, being as rich as he is, has given her everything she could ever want. So, I get why her dress must have cost a fortune. Honestly, I felt awful spilling wine on it. I truly did. But even though I could have been more careful, I can't help but wonder if my mistake really warranted such an extreme reaction. Did it justify her slapping me in the face, humiliating me in front of everyone, screaming at me and implying that I was poor? I may not be as wealthy as Brad, but I do just fine. I'm not poor like she claims. Of course, by her standards, anyone would look poor compared to her. I tried explaining this, but she wouldn't stop her rant. I could feel my blood pressure rising. Her voice became sharper, and it only made me more irritated. She was so close to me, practically pinning me down with her glare. During all this, I didn't realize it at first, or maybe I didn't want to, but before I could think, my hand moved on its own. I slapped her back, hard, so hard that it left her completely silent. It probably hurt more than her slap. Her cheek turned bright red. I locked eyes with her and said, "Can you stop yelling for a second so I can speak? I'll pay for your dress, so stop screaming about how I can't afford this. You've never had to spend a single cent without someone else footing the bill, so who are you to call me poor?" Brittany was clearly struggling to process what I'd just said. She looked furious, but before the argument could escalate, my mother-in-law, Margaret, shoved me away from her. "Get away from her!" she shouted, rushing to check on Brittany's face. Kyle, who had been silent throughout his sister's tantrum, suddenly joined his mother, now worried about his sister. They were suddenly full of concern for her while she started crying loudly, ranting about how disrespectful I was and how no one had ever slapped her before. Maybe that was the problem. My father-in-law, Steve, visibly alarmed, rushed to get ice for her face as if I'd caused permanent damage. The way they were reacting was almost surreal. It was as if Brittany had been shot or had a grenade explode in her face. My slap had been hard, but not that hard. The melodrama was overwhelming. Suddenly Kyle turned against me. "You had no right to slap my sister," he yelled. "This is all your fault. All you had to do was apologize and shut up." Trying to defend myself, I said, "We were dancing. Your sister came up behind me, and I didn't see her. I accidentally spilled wine on her dress." I apologized over and over, but what made it okay for her to slap me? At this point, I was determined to stand my ground because it felt like everyone was against me. Before Kyle could answer, Brittany snapped up and shot back. "How dare you slap me? Do you even know who you're dealing with? I'm going to sue you for assault. You'll pay for this. Remember that." Then she turned to Kyle, yelling at him as well. "What a disgrace. How can you not control your wife? She doesn't have the right to say anything to me after what she did." Without waiting for anyone to respond, she stormed off to the bathroom to change, with Margaret following closely behind to console her like a personal servant. I stood there in the middle of the room, surrounded by everyone who was whispering and clearly talking about me. Somehow, they saw me as the villain in this situation. That's when Kyle turned to me, frustrated and disappointed. "You need to go home," he said. "What?" I asked, feeling stunned. It seemed so crazy that he would say this, especially in front of everyone. I couldn't believe my own husband was telling me to leave. "You've done enough," he continued. "You've caused a scene, and my sister needs to calm down. She can't do that while you're still here. You shouldn't have slapped her back. In fact, you shouldn't have done anything. No matter what she did to you, you're older than her. You should act more maturely. I'm sure she didn't mean to slap you, but you made things worse by slapping her back. You just escalated the situation unnecessarily. My father-in-law, Steve, intervened, agreeing with Kyle. It's better for you to leave, he ordered. They were kicking me out of the house, not just my in-laws, but also my own husband. I couldn't believe he had completely chosen his sister's side, regardless of how unfairly I had been treated. I saw no point in arguing at that moment. I grabbed my things quickly, ordered an Uber, and left for home. During the ride, I could only think about how badly everything had gone. How had the night turned out like this? All I did was defend myself after being humiliated, slapped, and insulted. Was that really so unforgivable? And why didn't my husband, Kyle, take a stand for me? I knew that for Kyle, his little sister, Brittany, always came first. For instance, when I first met his family, it was during an informal lunch. I remember being nervous, but throughout the meal, my sister-in-law, Brittany, spent the entire time interrogating me about every detail of my life, my upbringing, my education, even my job. It didn't feel like a polite conversation, but more like an interrogation. I remember feeling confused by her intrusion. To be clear, both Kyle's family and mine come from similar socioeconomic backgrounds. I was already working in the tech field, which paid me significantly more than Kyle made in advertising. Despite all this, she acted as if I wasn't good enough for her brother. At one point, she openly said that Kyle was a great catch and that I should be careful if I were to get serious with anyone. Where was Kyle during all of this? Sitting silently, of course. Not once did he speak up to defend me. He just let his sister say what she wanted without challenging her, as if it wasn't his place to intervene. After that lunch, when we were alone, I told Kyle how upset I was. I explained that it wasn't fair for his sister to treat me like that, and, more importantly, that he should have defended me. To be fair, he apologized at that moment. He said he hadn't even realized how his sister's behavior looked, and excused her by saying she was just being protective of him. He told me he hadn't heard the whole conversation because he was distracted with something else. He promised that the next time he'd stand up for me, but over time, his promise faded. In the beginning, he did try a little, but then he just let things slide, returning to his usual ways. However, this time it was different. He had never been physical with me. When I got home, I waited for Kyle to return so we could talk, maybe even argue if necessary, anything to address the chaos of the night, but he never came back. Instead, in the middle of the night, I received a voice message from him. He said his sister Brittany was still upset and that he, along with his mother, Margaret, and father, Steve, were going to take care of her. As if that wasn't already hard enough, he continued by saying that most of his family believed I was wrong, and if his sister Brittany moved forward with her threats of suing me for assault and emotional damage, he would have no choice but to support her because she was family. He didn't stop there. He told me I needed to offer my sister-in-law, Brittany, a sincere apology, one that would calm her enough to deter her from pursuing legal action. I know many people in my position might have given in. Perhaps they would have apologized, swallowed their pride, and admitted to something they didn't believe in, just to keep the peace or avoid more conflict, but I couldn't. Deep down, I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. Yes, spilling the wine had been an accident, but I had apologized repeatedly. The slap I gave my sister-in-law, Brittany, wasn't unprovoked. It was a reaction to being humiliated, insulted, and physically attacked in front of everyone. If anyone needed to apologize, it was her. She had slapped me first. She had escalated the situation because she felt entitled. I knew that if she went through with a lawsuit, she wouldn't have a solid case. Her claims of emotional damage were, at best, laughable, given the circumstances. It was clear to me that her threats were just a power play, an attempt to make me beg for her forgiveness to soothe her bruised ego. But what hurt the most wasn't my sister-in-law, Brittany's actions. It was Kyle's. Throughout this whole ordeal, he showed where his true loyalty lay, with his family, not with me. The fact that he could so easily side with her, even after all I had endured, said a lot. Not once did he ask if I was okay. He didn't seek me out or offer any comfort. Instead, he spent the night blaming me for everything as if I were the sole cause of the chaos that night. As I listened to his voice message, I realized something painful but necessary. This wasn't just an issue with his sister or his family, it was an issue with him, with our relationship. So, the next morning, when I woke up and Kyle still hadn't come home, I decided to pack my things and leave without leaving any notes or explanations. When Kyle finally came home and found that I was gone, I imagined he must have been surprised. My phone started ringing with his calls. I answered, and he demanded to know where I was. There was no worry in his voice, no sign of distress or sadness, only anger. He yelled about how he didn't expect to come home and find the house empty, and how furious he was that I had left with all my things. Then, as if trying to justify his anger, he proudly announced that he had worked hard to convince his sister, Brittany, to come back with him to our house. His grand plan was for me to apologize to her face to face so the whole situation could be resolved. I couldn't help but let out a sarcastic laugh. Staying calm, I told him I was going to my parents' house and made it clear that I didn't plan on coming back anytime soon as I had a lot to think about. I also told him very clearly that I wouldn't apologize to his sister Brittany for something that wasn't my fault. However, I added that if his sister Brittany wanted to apologize to me for her behavior, I'd be more than willing to listen. That wasn't what he expected to hear. He argued that as my husband, I couldn't just leave like that. He called me rude and inconsiderate, demanding that I come home immediately, but I told him no. I also let him know that if his sister wanted to continue with her empty threats of suing me, she was more than welcome to try. The insults, the ugly words, were so painful that I don't even want to repeat them here. So, now I'm at my parents' house. I've told them what happened, and my dad is completely on my side. He even scolded Kyle for not defending me. However, my mom thinks I shouldn't have left my husband's side without talking to him first, and that communication is key to resolving our problems. So, according to her, I'm the bad one. Update 1. Today I checked the price of the dress online and sent the money to my sister-in-law, Brittany. I hope this puts an end to her complaints about the dress. I know many of you didn't want me to pay her, but I don't want to owe her anything. I ruined her dress, and I always intended to compensate her. It's what decent people do, and it's what I like to do. I even compensated her for the slap as well. I'd also like to clarify a few things that have repeatedly come up in the comments. First, as a woman, I know when another woman is deliberately trying to bother me. My sister-in-law, Brittany, has always had this inexplicable need to compete with me from the start, even though I've never seen her as competition. It's clear she's jealous of me for something, though I can't exactly pinpoint what. If I had to guess, it might be the fact that I've built a life and career for myself, unlike her. I didn't marry a rich man to afford nice things or live a comfortable life. I've worked hard all my life to achieve everything I have, and I suppose this financial independence is something she resents. My sister-in-law, Brittany, married a rich man, Brad, and seems to completely depend on him for the life she leads. While her husband, Brad, gives her everything, he's also quite controlling. Since he's much older than her, she has complained to us in the past that he doesn't let her go out much with her friends or wear certain clothes he doesn't like. However, I don't feel sorry for her. This is the life she chose for herself. She likes to boast about her luxurious lifestyle, constantly reminding us how privileged she is. She brags about her vacations to exotic places, the designer clothes and handbags she buys, or how she doesn't have to worry about working because her husband takes care of everything. She spends her days lounging by the pool, getting her nails done, or doing Pilates, so I don't understand why she resents me or sees me as competition when this is the life she always wanted. Secondly, my sister-in-law, Brittany's husband, Brad, wasn't present at the dinner that night. In general, he never attends any of our family events because he's too busy working. Moreover, the few times I've met him, he's very level-headed, so I'm sure that if he had been there, my sister-in-law, Brittany, would never have slapped me. He never would have allowed her to throw a tantrum like that since he cares a lot about his image in front of other people. Finally, after reading hundreds of comments on my post, I can't help but agree with everyone. My husband, Kyle, has always been a manipulator. For years, I wore rose-colored glasses, choosing to overlook the patterns that were always there. The truth is, he's constantly supported his family over me, and I allowed myself to believe this was how things should be. For example, Christmas and New Year's. Year after year, we've celebrated these holidays with his family, despite my repeated requests to alternate and spend those important holidays with my family. He has always manipulated me by saying that his family comes first. Every time I bring it up, he insists that as a good daughter-in-law, I must commit to and prioritize his family over mine. I've always felt that my needs, my family, and my traditions don't matter as much as his. In those moments, I've always felt guilty for wanting something different. I also blame myself for how things have turned out. Now I realize I've allowed my husband, Kyle, to dictate my life for a long time. His lack of consideration for my feelings combined with his subtle manipulation has always kept me in a place of doubt. I've always questioned myself, wondering if maybe I was being too demanding or unreasonable, but I'm glad I came to Reddit with my story. Everyone here has finally opened my eyes to the truth. Finally, the reason my mom thinks I'm somewhat on my husband's side is because she believes I shouldn't let a small issue like my sister-in-law, Brittany, being rude or toxic interfere with my marriage. Clearly, she doesn't understand how deep this problem is or how much it's affected me. She doesn't see how my husband, Kyle's behavior has drained me over time. However, she does recognize that the fact that my sister-in-law, Brittany, slapped me was completely wrong. Update 2. Kyle and I finally had a one-on-one conversation in a neutral setting, away from home, so we could clear the air. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since my last update, and I decided it was time to address things with him. When we met, Kyle began by apologizing. I was taken aback because, honestly, I didn't expect him to apologize at all. He told me how happy he was that I had paid for his sister Brittany's dress. This was exactly what he had been waiting for, a genuine acknowledgement of the situation. But, of course, Kyle quickly added that now it was my turn to apologize to his family. He explained that I still owed his sister Brittany an apology for humiliating her in front of everyone. He also said that his mother, Margaret, and his sister Brittany had basically threatened to exclude him from the family unless I apologized to her. I stared at him in disbelief and asked, "What about when she slapped me first? Is she going to apologize to me for that?" He tried to justify her actions by saying that Brittany was a little drunk and that seeing me spill red wine on her had made her react aggressively. He argued that anyone in her position would have acted the same way and that I should have just stayed quiet and accepted her response. At that point, I had to pause and take a deep breath. I wasn't sure if I was more hurt or angry by how little he seemed to understand what had actually happened. I then told him that while I regretted slapping his sister Brittany because I don't like resorting to violence, I didn't regret defending myself. I wished he had stood by me in front of his family, but since he didn't, I had no choice but to defend myself. Maybe if he had done the right thing, things wouldn't have gone that far, but his repeated failure to defend me and his willingness to let his sister treat me like dirt made me realize something very important. I couldn't be with someone who didn't respect me. I listed all the times he and his family had mistreated me over the years and how each of those moments had hurt. I told him that, as my husband, if he couldn't even stand up to his rude sister, I didn't see the point in continuing our relationship. Kyle argued that he loved his family and hated confrontation, especially with his precious sister. He pointed out that I was his wife, so I should understand why it was important to keep the peace. I told him that being his wife didn't mean I had to endure disrespect or mistreatment. Every time I stayed silent, I felt like I was choosing his family over myself, and I was tired of always being second in my own marriage. As if that wasn't enough, Kyle also told me that his mother, Margaret, had essentially uninvited me from all future family gatherings at her house because she didn't want me around. When I was shocked, Kyle argued that it wouldn't matter because I didn't like his family anyway. He said that, from now on, I was free to spend Christmas or New Year's with my own family, just like I had always wanted, while he'd spend the holidays with his. I laughed in disbelief at how selfish he sounded, the audacity to ignore my feelings and manipulate me again. At that moment, I told him that I had been thinking about a decision for days, but after our conversation, it was clear to me. I wanted a divorce. I was done with this marriage. Kyle's face immediately fell, and he looked like he couldn't believe what I'd just said. He argued that I wasn't thinking clearly and that I was just acting out of anger. Then he said, Fine. You don't have to talk about divorce if you don't want to. If you won't apologize to my sister, I'll talk to her and try to convince her to let it go this time since you're so set on this. But next time, don't slap my sister again." I told him I didn't care about any of that anymore. "It's over. My lawyer will be in touch with you soon. Now you're free to spend the rest of your life catering to your mother and your sister, just like you've always wanted." Kyle tried to argue more, but I just stood up and walked away, leaving him standing there. I couldn't stay in a relationship where I wasn't valued, where my feelings didn't matter, and where his family always came before our marriage. Since then, Kyle has been sending me voice messages begging me not to go through with the divorce. He keeps saying that I'm destroying our marriage and that he wants to spend the rest of his life with me. I've muted his messages for now and plan to continue ignoring him moving forward. Update 3. My mother-in-law, Margaret, has been relentlessly messaging me since I met with Kyle a few days ago and told him about the divorce. She insists I have no right to just leave her son. She believes I'm making him suffer out of spite. She's convinced that I should fix everything by moving back in with him, even if I'm unhappy in the marriage, and immediately apologize to Brittany. So, today I sent her this message. Margaret, I've already met with a lawyer, so the divorce is happening whether you like it or not. Just a heads up, I'm more than capable of exposing you and your spoiled daughter on social media now that I don't care about your family. You and your daughter have done nothing but harass me throughout this marriage, and I have screenshots to prove it, so don't test me. Your son will be left alone now because of you. I hope the next time he brings a woman home, you think twice before treating her like garbage. Since I sent that message, Margaret has read it but hasn't responded. I guess she finally realized I'm not joking. As for Brittany, she's blocked, so she can't contact me. Update 4. The divorce was finalized a couple of months ago, and now that I'm officially away from that crazy family, I can share more details about them. First off, I have to say that my ex-brother-in-law, Brad, helped me with my ex-sister-in-law, Brittany. After hearing about everything that happened, he told her he wouldn't give her any money to sue me and that she couldn't use any of his lawyers, who were tied up with more important matters. He also told her she should apologize to me, but of course, she never did. However, he did apologize to me on behalf of his wife by sending me a Christmas basket with various items and a handwritten note. The last thing I know about them is that they're now living separately because Brittany continued with that behavior. According to the card, her violent outbursts only started recently due to her frustration over wanting to be a mother but not being able to get pregnant. They had been trying for a year and were considering other options, but she was filled with frustration over it. She also slapped a spa employee shortly after the party I told you about. And this kind of behavior had been going on for a while. That's why Brad moved into an apartment they have in the city, while Brittany stayed at their house. I found out this last bit from Kyle during one of our divorce hearings. He tried to gain sympathy for his sister, as if her suffering somehow justified her actions, but she was already unpleasant before all this. Many people go through problems without mistreating others, so no, I don't feel any sympathy. The divorce is final, and I no longer have to deal with them or their toxic family dynamics, nor their empty excuses for what they did.